Well, good morning, Campus Church. Man, it is good to see you. And I'm just going to give a shameless plug right now for our Art of Marriage conference that's coming up on May 10th and 11th. It is such a great opportunity to invest in your marriage. I think oftentimes our mindset around a thing like a marriage conference is, well, things are going really good for our marriage. I don't need something like that. But how many of you know if you don't do tune-ups on your car regularly, the car begins to fall apart? Like, you don't do a tune-up because things are broken. You do a tune-up to keep things in shape and going in the right direction. And the same goes for our marriages. If we're not investing in them on a regular basis, the wheels tend to fall off of them. So I just want to encourage you, no matter where you find yourself at, maybe a ton of marital satisfaction, maybe things are a bit challenging for you. Like, if you have May 10th and 11th open on your calendar, would you sign up for our marriage conference? Come hang out with us. It's going to be a great weekend as we invest in our marriages in the context of a large group of people. Some of us have been going through the art of marriage because we're involved in a marriage-focused Canvas group, and we're using the same content for our conference that we have for our groups, but it's just a different environment when you get together in a room and you go through it at a fast pace. You just get different perspective, different ideas, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So I encourage you. There's a QR code and stuff like that in your bulletin. Sign up and be a part of our marriage conference coming up on May 10th and 11th. If you're a guest with us, I just want to welcome you. So glad that you're here. I echo what Annie said earlier. We're just pumped that you're hanging out with us. Really good to have you here. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'd love to meet you after the gathering. My name's Nate, by the way. I get to serve on the team here at Canvas and love what we're up to here as a church. There's so many people that are a part of the team. They're serving all over the building today, and just love being a part of the team and moving God's mission forward here in Coeur d'Alene. Now, this morning we are wrapping up our series. We've been in it now for 4 weeks. It was just a short one coming out of Easter, where we've been walking through the parables, 3 parables in the book of Luke, chapter 15. And these are incredible parables, as all of them have so much to teach us. That's what parables do. They're stories with intent. They help us to understand better who God is. When we understand better who God is, then in return, we understand better who we are. And when we understand better who we are and who God is, there's always this gap. There's always this gap between how God operates and how we operate. And it's an opportunity, it's an invitation to move closer to Jesus in his practices, in his life. And so as we've been working our way through these 3 parables, that's been our goal, to understand better who God is. Now, inside of these 3 parables, there are lost things all along the way. The first one is the lost sheep. The next one is the lost coin. And then the final one is the lost brothers. And that's where we find ourselves this morning. Last week, we kicked off the lost brothers by getting introduced to the younger brother. The younger brother who was incredibly selfish. He had one thing in mind. He was super disrespectful. Like, he treated his father in a way that Jewish boys should never treat their fathers. In fact, there was a law, it's in Leviticus, you can find it, that gave room for the kind of actions that he was doing. These are the kinds of things that get a young man stoned to death in the old Jewish law. So, completely disrespectful. Disrespectful on the level, he was like, "Dad, I wish you were dead." Literally, I wish you were dead. Unfortunately, you're more resilient than I ever thought you would be. So now we have to have this awkward conversation because I've come to the end of my rope. I'm tired of living under your rules, under your control. I want to just spread my wings and fly. I want to cast off all restraints. I just want to go on a self-discovery mission and figure out who I am and all that this world has to offer. This is a very common thing for us as human beings to do. In fact, one of the smartest men who have ever lived, his name's Solomon. He went on a journey like this of his own. You can read all about it. It's in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. So he goes on a journey of just self-discovery. And that's what we do oftentimes as humans. And that's what this younger brother does. He says, because you're super resilient, this leads to this very awkward conversation that we're going to have right now. I want your stuff. That's what the younger brother says to the dad. I want your stuff. I don't want you. I wish you were dead, because if you were dead, I would have already gotten your stuff. But since you're still alive, can we just pretend like you're dead? and then I could get my stuff and I could go on my merry way. And that's exactly what the Father does. It's surprising. It would surprise everybody that's listening. The first audience would have been shocked by this. A father in that day would not have done that. He would have cast the younger son out, barely with his life if he was lucky. But what does the father do? Somehow, he liquidates his stuff, so much so that he could get a third of his property together and give it to his younger son, and then give the 2/3 to the older son. And once the younger son has all of his stuff, he just sets out on this self-discovery mission. He goes off to a distant land where he squanders all of his wealth. He gives up all that he has, trying to find fulfillment, trying to find pleasure, trying to find comfort, trying to find control of his own life. He squanders it all and then has to make his way back home. Well, while he's off in a foreign land, squandering all of dad's wealth, the older brother is diligently at home working, seemingly following all of the rules that the father had put before him. Now, how many of you in here today are self-proclaimed rule followers? Okay. Not bad. Like, following rules is good. There's a ton of great reasons to follow rules. I mean, some of the greatest dishes you've ever eaten, it's because whoever was making that dish, they followed a recipe to the T, like they followed the rules of the recipe, and you end up with a fabulous dish, right? Some of the greatest photography that you've ever looked at, if you're not a photographer, you probably don't recognize this, but why is it such an amazing, beautiful picture? A picture that just makes you stop and gaze for a long time? Because the photographer followed rules of photography in order to produce that image. It wasn't by accident, it was by following the rules along the way. There are rules to photography. So following rules is great. Societies, they thrive because by and large, as a society, we generally follow the rules. So rules aren't bad things. In fact, I fancy myself as a rule follower. By and large, rule follower. It's always a shock to people when they find out that I'm actually more of a rule follower than Heidi. Yeah, she likes to break the rules. Her motto is, rules are meant to be broken, or at least push the lines a little bit. But I'm a rule follower, and I love to cross T's, and I love to dot I's, and just kind of the buttoned up life, real systematic about things. So much to my surprise, when my oldest daughter, she's in kindergarten, she's having a kindergarten picnic, and I'm not invited to the picnic. I was blown away by this. I mean, when she first said I couldn't come to the picnic, she's in kindergarten, and kindergartners are cute, and I thought it was adorable. Until I doubled down and no, seriously, when is the picnic? I'd love to come. And I was actually taking pictures a lot at the time, and I wanted to photograph her first, she's number one. We need to get the kindergarten picnic on film. And she doubled down. No, Dad, you can't come to the picnic. So I thought I would just let it rest. Yeah, maybe she's having a day, right? A couple days later, I asked, hey, can I come to your picnic? No, I don't want you to come to my picnic. And at this point, I'm getting sad, okay? I've invested a lot now. We're 5 years into this relationship, and I have given a lot. The least I should be able to do is go to the kindergarten picnic. But we let it rest for a couple more days, come back in, ask again. She is just firmly committed to the fact that Dad is not coming to the picnic, which finally begged the question, why? Why can't I come to your picnic? What's going on? Why don't you want me there? And she says, well, remember when we were at the mall the other day? Yeah? And you took Madeline down the escalator in her stroller? Yeah. Well, there was a sign that said that you can't do that. You can't go down the escalator with strollers. There was a sign with a circle and the line through it. You're not supposed to do that, and you did that. And I'm afraid that if my teacher gives us rules at the picnic, that you're not going to follow them. So like a good dad, I let her know that there are some things that look like rules, but they're just simply suggestions. They were just suggesting that I didn't take the child in the stroller down the escalator. I was like, sweetie, it all worked out, right? She's fine. We're fine. It's fine. Then I promised her, whatever rules your teacher lays down, I will follow them, okay? Can I come to the picnic? Yeah, you can come to the picnic. It was a wonderful time. I didn't realize that the apple didn't fall far from the tree in that moment, but she was like, man, I need you to follow the rules. Following the rules is not necessarily a bad thing, but we do have to understand that there is a shadow side to being a rule follower, and it's called moral conformity. See, too often we use these rules and we follow them like we do it in order to fulfill a bankrupt promise of power, control, approval, comfort. Like these bankrupt promises, sometimes our thought is, especially if we're buttoned up kind of people, is that if I follow all the rules, then I will get things to tip in my favor, right? Like the argument goes like this. If I follow all the rules, I will put other people in my debt. I'll put my boss in my debt. I'll put my parents in my debt. I'll put my siblings in my debt, like whoever it is. If I do this, if I do the right things, then I'm going to force them to be in my debt, and then I get to call the shots along the way. Worse yet, oftentimes we do the right things in order to put God in our debt. If I follow all the rules, I check all the boxes, I get up every morning, I spend time in prayer, I spend time reading my Bible, I do my best not to like make fun of my neighbors, I go out on my way to help people who are in need. Like if I do all of these things, then I can put the creator of the universe in my debt. Now all of a sudden, I become his God, and I get to twist his arm to do the things I want him to do. Now maybe that's far too blunt for you. Likely it is. None of us in this room this morning are going to say, I did everything good that I did today in order to grab God's arm, twist it, and force him into my mold to do what I want him to do. We wouldn't say that. Instead, we say things like this. When things go wrong, we ask questions like this, like, why is this happening to me? Like, why am I going through this? And we follow it up with maybe not articulate, but these are the questions that roll around in our mind. Haven't I done enough good things? Like, haven't I been a good enough person? We've all probably asked the question like, why do bad things happen to good people? You know where that question is based in? It's based in this idea that if we're good people, then life should go good for us, and everything that we want should come into play. Over the last 3 years, we've walked through some significant challenges as a family. And I know these truths, but I find myself at times wallowing in these questions like, God, why us? Haven't we done enough? Why does tragedy have to strike us? There's plenty of bad people out there that you could do things to. Why us? And that question burrows down to this reality that too often I think that my goodness is what should get me into the kingdom of God. My goodness is what should leverage me a better life here on this earth. Friends, that's just simply not what the scriptures tell us. See, last week we learned from the younger brother that our badness doesn't keep us out. That's great news for us. For some of you this morning, like that's the word that you need to hear, because rolling around in your mind as you walk through the doors today is, man, I'm here, but I don't know that God could ever forgive me for what I've done. Because you think your badness keeps you out. But you need to know that your badness doesn't keep you out. But the other side to this is too often we think that our goodness gets us in. So last week was your badness doesn't keep you out, and this week the sermon in a sentence, or if we were going to boil this down to one simple point, it is this: your goodness doesn't get you in. So your badness doesn't keep you out, but your goodness doesn't get you in. And we're going to find this in Luke chapter 15. We're going to be in verses 20 through 32. And for a lot of us, maybe you couldn't identify with the self-discovery path of the younger brother that we talked about last week. You're like, that's just not who I am. I'm just more of a rule follower, right? I just like to do things the right way. And if that's the case, if you couldn't identify with the self-discovery mode of the younger brother, then today should be like a mirror for you. It shows us the other side of the lost coin. It's the flip side of the same coin, and the coin is still lost, and it's what's called moral conformity. If I conform to all the moral rules and laws, then I put God in my debt, and he must do what I ask him to do. Let's take a look at the story. We're gonna start in verse 20. We walked through this last week together, but I think it best sets the stage and the backdrop for the older brother's reaction to what was going on. So again, younger brother has come back home. He had a speech all worked up before he got there. I'm going to go back, tell my dad, hey, I sinned against heaven. I sinned against you. Would you please hire me on as a servant? And what he's saying is, and then I can pay my debt off. Maybe I can be called a son someday when my debt's paid off. Verse 20 says, so he returned, he being the younger son. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And remember, he had conjured up more of a speech. He was going to go on to say, hire me on as your servant so that I can pay off my debt, essentially. But he doesn't get the chance to get the rest of his speech out to his father because his father cuts him off when he says, but his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get the ring for his finger and the sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead, and now he has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Meanwhile, I love that word. It just reminds me of a cheesy sitcom. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard the music and the dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, what's going on? Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating, we are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all of these years I have slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat to feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate him by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead, and he's come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. See, for us moral conformists in the room, we feel the older brother's pain, don't we? We understand his frustration and his indignation. When you feel that rising up inside of you, you have now found your character in the story. You realize where you fit. See, it's easy to read the prodigal son parable, point our fingers at the younger brother, thinking of all the younger brothers in our lives that have squandered so much, and thinking, man, they need to come on home. While the whole time thinking to ourselves that we've got it all worked out. We've got it all put together. So we feel the indignation and the anger and the frustration of the older brother. But I want to remind you who started this triad of parables. It was the Pharisees. You see, Jesus had a great following at this point in his ministry. A ton of people were coming out to listen to him. He was doing fabulous things. He was teaching with authority like they had never heard before. So you can imagine there was a great crowd of people around Jesus, and he was spending his time with some disreputable people. And the Pharisees were like, if this guy was really a religious ruler, he would know who these people are. And he would stay far away from them. What were they saying? If Jesus was who he said he was, he would be spending less time with those sinners and more time with us people who got it all right because we conform to morality. We've got it figured out. Why would he spend time with all of them? They couldn't believe that Jesus was spending time even eating with these disreputable sinners. And as I read through this, I recognize that the longer I'm a Christian, the more susceptible I am to join the ranks of the Pharisees. The more prone I am to becoming the older brother in the story, thinking that I have it all figured out. Sure, when I came to faith in Jesus, it was by faith and faith alone. I was a scoundrel even at 12 years old, and I recognized it. But now I've got 3.5 decades under my belt of following after Jesus, and I become more prone to becoming the Pharisee or the older brother. Again, evidenced by the fact that when things go wrong, I start to ask questions like, but God, haven't I done so much for you? Why is this happening to me? What am I saying? My good works should be working in my favor. So I become the older brother in the story, and when I begin to keep score, it is a sure sign that I have become the older brother. And I'm so bad at keeping score. So bad at keeping score. I remember on a job site, working away, I always wanted to count how much lumber the next guy was carrying, how many trips they took, how many walls they built. Always. Keeping score, keeping track. I had a tally sheet. Nobody else around me knew the tally sheet. Happens around the house, right? The chores that I do, the things that I get done, and does everybody else match up around me? Now, I don't always verbalize. I won't say I'll never. I don't always verbalize the scorecard, but I keep a scorecard. And I'm keeping a scorecard because my thought is, my good should outweigh the bad. And as long as I'm ahead of everybody else, then I leverage something to my benefit. That's exactly what the older brother has done here, leveraging his goodness for his own benefit. And just like all parables, the older brother has something to teach us today. In fact, most of us in this room or listening online, we've likely been serving Jesus now for years, some decades. So likely, the older brother has more to teach us than the younger brother has to teach us. So let's jump in with the rest of our time together and learn 3 things. Again, this isn't all to be learned about this parable, but these are 3 things that I think if we understand them correctly, it's going to help us live differently. And the first one is this: the older brother was as selfish as the younger brother. The older brother was as selfish as the younger brother. This week I read a non-biblical story, an ancient non-biblical story. It's called an apocrypha. So writings that were written around the same time as the Bible, but was not considered inspired by the Holy Spirit of God, so it was left out of the scriptures, was left out of the canon of the Bible. It doesn't mean it doesn't have anything helpful for us, historical to teach us. So this is an ancient non-biblical story that I think illustrates this truth really well. The story goes something like this. One day Jesus said to his disciples, I want you to carry a stone for me. Pick up a stone and carry it for me. So all the disciples were scurrying around to pick up a stone, and Peter, being the pragmatic guy that he was, right, just super practical, he found the smallest stone that he could find. Because Jesus didn't give any parameters around how big the stone had to be, right? So find the smallest one. I don't blame him, right? Picked it up, stuck it in his pocket, and then Jesus said, follow me. So they take off walking as they often did. And they walked half a day, and it's about lunchtime, and Jesus sits them all down. And he says, I want you to pull out your stone. So they all pull out their stone, and he waves his hand over the top, and all of their stone turns into bread. And Jesus says, now eat. And Peter's like, oof. Just a small morsel of food, right? Thinking to himself, wow, I played that one wrong. And then Jesus says, pick up another stone and carry it for me. So Peter's like, I know how this game works, okay? Dinner's coming. And clearly, because of what I didn't eat at lunch, I need more for dinner. So he found the biggest boulder that he could physically pick up and carry, puts it on his shoulder. You can imagine that would be annoying for half a day, right? Throws it on his shoulder, and he's carrying it around, and it makes him stumble around. But sure enough, he carries it all the way till dinner. And they show up, and they show up to this river, and Jesus tells all the disciples, throw your stone in the river. So they throw their stone in the river, and Jesus says, follow me. Peter's like, wait a minute. What in the, like, it didn't play out like I thought it did. Like I carried that stone because that was my dinner. And as he begins to squabble in his mind, Jesus reminds him, like, who did I tell you to carry that for? That's the question at the end of this parable. Who did I tell you to carry this for? You see, at the beginning, Jesus says, I want you to pick up a stone and carry it for me. But what does Peter do? He obeys, but who does he obey for? Himself. And that's why he picked the smallest stone at first. And then when he thought he caught on to the game, then he picked up the larger stone. Was that so that he would obey Jesus, or because he wanted a bigger meal at dinner time? See, it begs the question for all of us, doesn't it? It makes us pause in our tracks and ask ourselves, who are we working for? Who are we working for? If I'm real transparent, if I take a real good inventory of my life, too often I'm working for me because I'm just as selfish as the younger brother. I just do it in a different way. The good works that I do, the good deeds that I do, it's in order to put somebody else in my debt. You see, the older brother wasn't working for the father, he was working for himself. He just cloaked it in selfishness, or he cloaked his selfishness rather in morality, which then turned to anger when he didn't get the good life he thought he deserved. And that's why it boils over in this conversation with the father, right? You can almost hear the seething in his voice when he says, all these years I have slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat to feast with my friends. See, the older brother, he made it look like he was working for the father. But all the while, he was working for himself. And when things didn't go the way that he thought they would go, it turned to anger. And that's what happens when we pursue after false promises. When we pursue counterfeit gods, when we pursue idolatry, worshiping other gods, it will always lead us down. It will leave us disillusioned. It will leave us angry. It will leave us anxious. It will leave us lonely. It will leave us confused. It will always leave us wanting. The older brother found this out in grand fashion because his selfishness boiled to the surface. The second thing that we learn about the older brother is that the older brother was as sinful as the younger brother. He was just as sinful. If your goodness is being used to leverage power and control, to put God in your debt, your goodness is misplaced and it is sinful. It's hard to think that I could be sinning by doing good, isn't it? It's hard to get our minds wrapped around that. But if my goodness is motivated by selfishness, then it's always sinful. It's always sinful. So the older brother in the story, he's just as sinful as the younger brother, but when you read through it, you don't pick up on it. But his goodness was motivated by selfishness, and that is always sinful. So you can sin by being very bad, and you can sin by being very good. And it all comes down to your motivations. Where is the motivations of your heart? The third thing that we learn in this story is that the older brother was in need of the father's invitation just as much as the younger brother. The older brother was in need of the father's invitation just as the younger brother was. See, the father, he goes out to both sons in this parable. In fact, there's always somebody going to look for that which is lost in all three parables. The shepherd goes after the lost sheep. The woman goes after the lost coin. And the father goes after his lost sons, plural. Both sons were lost in this story. Both of them. And this is a challenge for us to grasp, evidenced by the fact that oftentimes we call this parable the parable of the lost son, singular. I'm going to guess most of us, when we think about the prodigal son, we think about the younger brother. This whole parable centers around him and his sinfulness. But the reality is there were two lost sons, plural, and the father went after both of them. When the younger one was a long way off, what does the father do? Out of compassion, he goes running after him. He stops him in his tracks. He cuts him off mid-sentence, and he restores him to the family as a son. It's a beautiful picture. And then the older brother comes home when they're celebrating. And what does the father do? He goes out to him. He leaves this great party that's being thrown because his dead son is alive. His lost son is now found, and he comes out to his other lost son. And he tries to share with him how important it is for him to join the party. Come into the party. Let's celebrate. That's exactly what the younger brother did, didn't he? The father gives him the ring, gives him the ring, gives him the robe, gives him the sandals, invites him into the party. The younger brother goes into the party willingly. And then he goes out to the older son and he offers him the same invitation. Would you come into the party? Would you come in and be a part? Your younger brother who was lost is now found. Come in and celebrate with us. And the parable leaves us hanging. We don't know what the older brother does. It just ends. We don't know whether or not the older brother received the invitation or not. But on this side of life, on this side of history, we know exactly what the invitation was to the older brother. To receive from Jesus what no other promise could fulfill. See, the father was offering the older brother into relationship with Jesus because he needed that invitation just as much as the younger brother. There's this common idea that good people should get to heaven. Shouldn't my goodness get me in the door? And the reality is there's none of us that are good. And that's why we are all in need of Jesus. In fact, scholars point out that it would have been the older brother's responsibility to go after his younger brother. Back in that society, if the younger brother was lost, if he had gone off to a distant land and didn't come home, the older brother's leadership in the home would make him responsible to use the resources that he had at his disposal to go off to that distant land to find the younger brother and to bring him back home. But that's not what the older brother does he? He just stays put. And it's amazing how Jesus now ties this parable to the ancient story of Israel. So you go all the way back to the beginning of Israel where God takes Abram at the time, and he makes a promise to him. He says, I'm going to bless you that you will bless the nations. He said, I'm going to give you resources in order for you to go after those who are lost, to declare my name, to let them know who I am, so that they too can declare my name. And what does Israel do? Hoards the resources. Evidenced by the Pharisees and the response to Jesus hanging out with those who were lost and needed to be found. And what scholars say is that what Jesus is doing is he's contrasting his role and the role of the older brother. You see, the older brother missed his opportunity to go after the lost. And Jesus says, I have come to seek and to save that which is lost. So Jesus is the perfect older brother. Jesus is the older brother that we want in this parable. He's the one that shows up, uses his resources, all of them, for the salvation of those who are lost. And that's every person who has not surrendered their life to Jesus. If we could have the worship team come at this time. See, it's because of the work of Jesus that your badness doesn't keep you out and your goodness doesn't get you in. I want you to hear that so clearly this morning. It is because of the work of Jesus that your badness doesn't keep you out and your goodness doesn't get you in. And Jesus is the only way. He is the one that provides where all other promises fail. And if you're in pursuit of any other promise other than what Jesus has promised you, I promise you, it will fail. It is a bankrupt endeavor. Because we cannot find fulfillment, we cannot find contentment in anything other than Jesus and his work on the cross. Comfort, control, approval, and power, they will all fail you. They are all bankrupt promises. And in the end, you end up paying. But the Christian gospel is God came and he paid for us. So Jesus made a promise. He paid the payment for it so that you and I can find fulfillment in him and him alone. Would you stand to your feet this morning? Got a question. Have you been trying to find fulfillment and contentment through moral conformity? You need to know that Jesus provides where other promises fail. And if you haven't surrendered your life to him, then friend, you are still lost. So this is really an invitation to both the younger brothers in the room and the older brothers in the room, the younger sisters in the room and the older sisters in the room. If you've been trying to find fulfillment through self-discovery, cast off all restraint, Jesus invites you into relationship with him. If you've been trying to find fulfillment by checking all the boxes and crossing the T's and dotting the I's and doing all the things right, but you haven't surrendered to Jesus, it's an invitation to surrender your life to Jesus. Receive his invitation. Stop striving. Enter into relationship with him. And if you're here and that's you, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. See me afterwards or as the band plays. I'd love to talk to you about what it looks like to surrender your life to Jesus. Out in the lobby, email me this week, whatever it looks like. Talk to somebody that you know that's following Jesus. They can talk with you about what it looks like to surrender, but talk to somebody. And the second takeaway I have is this. Let's join Jesus in his pursuit of the irreligious. Let's go after him. These stories are help us understand that there's a party waiting. We should be celebrating when every lost person comes home, when every lost is found, when the dead come back to life. And Jesus, for some crazy reason, he handed this mission off to us. He gave us the baton, and he said, pursue the irreligious. Go after them. They're lost. I love them, and I want a relationship with them. Every one of us has lost people in our lives. We work with them. We neighbor next to them. We have family reunions with them. Let's go after them because that's what Jesus asked us to do. So I'm going to pray. The band's going to play. We're going to have friends up here who would love to pray with you if you need prayer. Father, thank you for your word. It is so challenging to us. if we pause long enough to let it take inventory of our lives, there's always a discrepancy. So thank you, God, that because of Jesus' work on the cross, my badness doesn't keep me out, because there's plenty of it. And thank you, Lord, that I don't have to rely on my goodness to get me in, because there's just not enough of it. So Jesus, thank you for the work that you did. Help us all to respond to it appropriately. In your name we pray. Amen.